Ahri's story began long before she roamed the forests of Ionia or became a figure shrouded in myth and allure. Her origins trace back to the mystic Vastaya, a race born from the union of humans and magical creatures. The Vastaya were not merely inhabitants of Runeterra, they were its living embodiments of magic, their existence tied to the very essence of the land. Among their kind, Ahri's lineage was unique, even among the already rare fox-like Vastaya Shirei. Her bloodline was deeply connected to the spiritual energies of the natural world, making her attuned to the delicate balance of life and death. Yet, despite her mystical heritage, Ahri's early life was one of solitude and longing. Separated from her kin for reasons unknown, she grew up without the guidance of her people, left to piece together her identity in a world that often seemed both wondrous and cruel. Her earliest memories were of the wild, untamed beauty of Ionia's forests. Here she hunted and survived, learning the rhythms of the natural world and developing an uncanny ability to sense the emotions of the creatures around her. This connection was more than empathy. It was a gift, allowing her to not only feel but manipulate the spiritual essence of others. But this gift came with a dark undertone. It began innocently enough. A dying deer, its life force fading, seemed to transfer its energy to her as she tried to comfort it. She felt a warmth spread through her body, a surge of vitality that made her feel more alive than ever before. This was her first encounter with the mysterious magic she later came to rely on, though at the time she couldn't fully grasp what it meant. What she did understand, however, was that her survival in a world teeming with danger would depend on her ability to harness this power. As Ahri grew, so too did her abilities. She became a silent predator, not just of physical prey, but of emotions and life force. The animals she hunted provided sustenance for her body, while the faint, lingering traces of their essence sustained something deeper, her soul. But this delicate balance could not last forever. Her curiosity about the world of humans, the flashes of villages she glimpsed through the trees, and the echo of laughter carried on the wind drew her closer to civilization. The more she watched, the more she longed to understand the lives of those who lived beyond the forest's edge. When she finally approached a human village, her presence was met with awe and fear. Her fox-like tails and otherworldly beauty marked her as something beyond mortal comprehension, and her charm soon became her greatest weapon. She quickly learned how to adapt, using her allure to gain favor, food, and shelter. Yet, her growing fascination with humanity brought with it an even darker realization. Human life energy was far more potent than that of any animal. With it came a rush, a vitality that left her intoxicated, but also a deep and gnawing guilt. Ahri's early experiences with humans were marked by both wonder and tragedy. She didn't intend to harm them, at least not at first. The villagers who welcomed her became the first victims of her untrained power. Their life forces seemed to pour into her unintentionally during moments of vulnerability or emotional intensity. The first time it happened, she fled in terror, unable to face the weight of what she had done. But the hunger lingered, and in time, she found herself drawn back, caught in a cycle of yearning and regret. Over time, Ahri learned to control her abilities, honing them with a mixture of instinct and necessity. She developed her signature charm, a spell that allowed her to entrance those who gazed upon her, bending their will to her desires. This power gave her freedom, but it also deepened her isolation. Those who fell under her spell looked at her with adoration, but it was a hollow, artificial affection. True connection eluded her, and the faces of those she had taken life from haunted her dreams. It was during this time that Ahri began to hear whispers of her origins from the scattered fragments of Vastayan lore. Legends spoke of a fox spirit who once roamed the lands, a being both feared and revered for her ability to walk between the realms of the living and the spiritual. Though Ahri had no clear memory of her past, these tales awakened a spark of recognition within her. Was she the fox spirit of legend, reborn into mortal form? Or was she merely a shadow of something greater, doomed to live a life of yearning and incompletion? Her journey to uncover the truth of her heritage led her deeper into Ionia's spiritual heartlands, where the land itself seemed to resonate with her presence. Here, she encountered other Vastaya, though their reactions to her were mixed. Some saw her as a kindred spirit, while others viewed her as a warning, a being who had strayed too far from their ancient traditions. Through these encounters, Ahri began to piece together fragments of her identity, learning of the Vastaya's ancient pact with the land and their role as guardians of its magical balance. But even as she grew closer to understanding her origins, Ahri could not escape the shadow of her past. The lives she had taken, the power she had drawn from others, it all weighed heavily on her, a burden she could not simply cast aside. Each step forward seemed to bring her closer to the truth, but also deeper into the realization that her enchanting nature was both her greatest strength and her most damning curse. As Ahri stood at the crossroads of her journey, her heart was torn between two worlds: the untamed wilds of her Vastian heritage and the alluring, dangerous world of humanity. Her search for answers would not only define her own path, but also echo across the spiritual fabric of Runeterra, where the line between predator and prey, hunter and hunted, was thinner than the edge of a blade. Ahri's journey toward understanding herself was never meant to be an easy one. Her initial steps outside the safety of the Ionian forests brought her into a world filled with wonder and opportunity, but also brimming with dangers she had never imagined. Her first true challenges came not from the wilds, but from the complexities of human society and her own growing power, an unpredictable force that threatened to consume her from within. Her first encounter with the bustling human settlement was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The village of Yuyan was nestled within the heart of Ionia, its streets alive with the hum of daily life. Merchants called out their wares, children laughed as they darted between the stalls, and the aroma of roasted chestnuts filled the air. To Ahri, it was a tapestry of sensations, each thread pulling her deeper into a world she longed to understand. But the villagers, wary of strangers, eyed her cautiously. Her exotic beauty and unusual features marked her as otherworldly, and while curiosity flickered in their gazes, so too did fear. At first, Ahri's charm was her greatest ally. She quickly learned to navigate social situations by leaning on her natural allure, softening wary glances into welcoming smiles. The villagers, enchanted by her presence, were quick to offer her food, shelter, and companionship. Yet beneath this facade of acceptance, Ahri began to sense an undercurrent of tension. Her ability to feel the emotions of others, a skill she had always taken for granted, was growing stronger, almost overwhelming. She could sense their doubts, their whispered fears of the fox spirit woman who had appeared in their midst. Her struggles deepened as she realized she could not fully control her powers. The life essence she inadvertently absorbed from others left her feeling invigorated, but also hollow. Every time she drew from someone's vitality, whether through an accidental touch or an intense emotional connection, she felt the weight of their loss settle into her soul. Though no one in the village openly accused her of wrongdoing, Ahri could see the toll her presence was taking. The once lively innkeeper grew pale and lethargic after a conversation with her, and a young farmer stumbled home one evening, dazed and weak after meeting her gaze for too long. The growing unease came to a head one fateful evening. A village elder, a stern but kind man named Wei, approached Ahri in the marketplace. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard, but there was no malice in his tone. "You are not like us," he said plainly, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "I do not know if you mean us harm, but your presence here is unnatural. The balance of this place is shifting, and I fear it is because of you." Ahri felt the weight of his words like a stone in her chest. She wanted to argue, to deny the accusation, but deep down she knew he was right. The village, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed dimmer, quieter, as though a shadow had settled over it. She had tried so hard to fit in, to be part of their world, but her very nature made it impossible. No matter how much she tried to control her powers, they would always seep through the cracks, leaving an indelible mark on those around her. Her growing desperation to belong clashed with the reality of her situation. She began to isolate herself, spending more time on the outskirts of the village and less among the people. But even in solitude, the challenges persisted. The hunger she felt, the deep, gnawing need for life essence, grew stronger the more she resisted it. It was no longer just a whisper in the back of her mind. It was a roar, a primal instinct that demanded to be fed. One night, the conflict within her reached its breaking point. She was walking alone along the edge of the village when she heard a cry for help. A young girl had fallen into a nearby stream, swept away by the current. Without hesitation, Ahri sprang into action, diving into the icy waters and pulling the child to safety. The villagers arrived moments later, their torches casting flickering light over the scene. They saw the girl, trembling but unharmed in Ahri's arms. For a brief moment there was gratitude in their eyes, but as Ahri helped the girl to her feet, she felt it again, the faint, almost imperceptible pull of life force. The girl looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, and Ahri felt her power stir, unbidden. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. The girl's mother, rushing to embrace her child, froze in place, her expression shifting from relief to horror. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The question hung in the air, and Ahri knew there was no answer she could give that would satisfy them. The villagers began to murmur, their fear bubbling to the surface. The gratitude they had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by suspicion and dread. Ahri took a step back, her tail swaying nervously as she felt the weight of their gazes on her. She wanted to explain, to tell them she meant no harm, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned and fled into the forest, her heart pounding as the shouts of the villagers echoed behind her. That night, as she sat alone beneath the canopy of trees, Ahri grappled with the full weight of her existence. She had saved the girl, but in doing so, she had revealed the truth of her nature, something she had worked so hard to conceal. The villagers' fear was justified. She couldn't control her power, and no matter how much she wanted to be part of their world, she would always be a danger to them. This first conflict marked a turning point in Ahri's journey. It was no longer just about survival or understanding her abilities. It was about finding a way to reconcile the two. She realized that she couldn't continue living on the fringes, neither fully Vastaya nor fully human. If she was to move forward, she would need to confront the truth of her nature and the consequences of her actions. But how could she find balance when her very essence seemed to tip the scales toward chaos? The question lingered in her mind, a puzzle she was determined to solve, even if it meant venturing deeper into the unknown. The forest had always been Ahri's refuge, but now it felt like a prison. She wandered its familiar paths, her mind heavy with the weight of her recent encounter with the villagers. Their fear, their distrust, it all lingered in her thoughts, replaying over and over like an endless loop. For days, she avoided the village entirely, afraid of what her presence might bring. She had always believed she could find a way to live among humans, to be part of their world, but now she wasn't so sure. Her isolation, however, was interrupted one fateful night by a chance meeting that would change everything. The moon was high in the sky, its silvery light spilling through the treetops as Ahri followed the sound of a faint melodic tune carried on the wind. It was a song unlike any she had ever heard, soft, haunting, and filled with an emotion that tugged at her very soul. Drawn by its beauty, she found herself moving deeper into the forest, toward the source of the music. The sound led her to a small clearing, where a lone man sat beside a fire, a strange instrument cradled in his hands. He was an older man, his weathered face marked by years of travel and hardship, yet there was a warmth in his eyes that made him seem younger than his years. His clothing was simple but sturdy, the kind worn by wanderers and storytellers. As Ahri stepped into the clearing, his fingers paused on the strings, and he looked up to meet her gaze. There was no fear in his expression, no hesitation, only curiosity. I wasn't expecting company, he said, his voice calm and steady. Ahri hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had spent so long avoiding human contact that the idea of speaking to one now felt almost foreign. But there was something about this man, something disarming. Slowly, she stepped closer, her golden eyes never leaving his. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. The man chuckled, gesturing to the fire and the instrument in his lap. "What does it look like?" "I'm playing for the trees. They're a better audience than most people I've found." Ahri tilted her head, intrigued. "Why not play for people?" He sighed, his gaze drifting to the flames. "People don't listen the way they used to. They're too caught up in their own lives to hear the stories the songs are trying to tell." He looked back at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But you seem like someone who listens." Ahri felt a strange warmth at his words. She wasn't sure why, but she found herself sitting down across from him, her tails curling around her. "I've been listening to you for a while," she admitted. "Your song, it's beautiful." The man smiled, his fingers moving over the strings once more. "Every song has a story," he said. "This one is about a fox spirit who longed to be human. She wanted so badly to understand them, to be part of their world, that she gave up her own nature. But in doing so, she lost herself." Ahri's breath caught in her throat. The story felt painfully familiar, as if the man had plucked it from her own heart. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's fingers stilled, and he looked at her with a seriousness that made her shiver. She realized too late that she couldn't change what she was, but that didn't mean she couldn't change who she chose to be. Ahri stared at him, her mind racing. His words struck a chord deep within her, awakening a realization she had been avoiding for so long. She couldn't run from her nature, couldn't deny the power that flowed through her. But perhaps she could find a way to use it for something other than destruction. Perhaps her gift, as dangerous as it was, could be more than a curse. Before she could respond, the man rose to his feet, slinging the instrument over his shoulder. "You've got a story too," he said, looking down at her. "And it's not over yet, but you've got to decide how it's going to end." With that, he turned and walked into the forest, leaving Ahri alone by the fire. She sat there for a long time, the man's words echoing in her mind. For the first time in her life, she began to see her powers in a different light. They weren't just tools for survival or weapons of destruction. They were part of her, a reflection of who she was. And if she could learn to control them, to truly understand them, perhaps she could find a way to use them for good. That night marked a turning point for Ahri. When the fire finally died and the clearing was bathed in darkness, she made a silent vow. She would no longer run from her nature or allow it to control her. Instead, she would seek out the answers she needed to master it, no matter how long it took or where it led her. The first step was to leave the forest behind and venture into the wider world. If she was going to find the truth about herself and her powers, she couldn't do it alone. She needed to learn from others, humans, Vastaya, and anyone who could help her unlock the secrets of her nature. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Ahri stood and began to walk. The forest, which had always been her sanctuary, faded into the distance as she set her sights on a new horizon. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose, a spark of hope. The path before her was uncertain, but she was determined to follow it, no matter where it led. And in the back of her mind, the melody of the man's song lingered, a reminder that her story was far from over. The open roads of Ionia, lined with ancient trees and whispered secrets, became Ahri's new home. She ventured from village to village, seeking knowledge, guidance, and understanding. Along the way, she encountered scholars, mystics, and even other Vastaya, each offering fragments of insight into her nature. Yet, with every step forward, Ahri found herself shadowed by the same gnawing hunger, the insatiable pull of life essence that refused to be tamed. It was no longer a passive need. It had grown into a relentless force, threatening to consume her entirely. The conflict reached its peak when Ahri came upon a secluded monastery nestled in the cliffs overlooking the Jade Sea. The monks who lived there were known as keepers of ancient Ionian wisdom, their teachings rooted in the balance between spirit and nature. Ahri hoped they could help her find the answers she sought, a way to master the power that coursed through her veins. The monks welcomed her with cautious curiosity. Their leader, a serene yet imposing figure named Master Shenli, agreeing to guide her. For weeks, Ahri trained under Shenlei's watchful eye. She practiced meditation, learning to quiet her mind and channel her energy inward. She studied the intricate dance of balance that the monks revered, the harmony between light and shadow, life and death. At first, it seemed to help. Ahri began to feel more in control, her hunger dulled to a faint whisper rather than a deafening roar. The monks believed she was making progress, but Shenli remained skeptical. "The balance you seek is not something that can be taught," he told her one evening as they sat beneath the stars. "It must come from within. You carry a storm inside you, Ahri, and storms cannot be silenced. They must be weathered." Ahri listened, her heart heavy with doubt. She had thought that discipline and training would be enough to tame her powers, but Shenli's words made her realize the truth. Her struggle wasn't just against her nature, it was against herself. The hunger she felt, the allure of life essence, wasn't simply a curse. It was a reflection of her deepest fears and desires, a manifestation of the part of her that she'd always tried to hide. The turning point came during a festival held by the monastery to celebrate the arrival of spring. Villagers from the surrounding areas came to join the monks in their rituals, filling the usually serene grounds with laughter and music. Ahri watched from the shadows, her golden eyes scanning the crowd. She had avoided large gatherings since leaving the forest, afraid of the temptation they presented. But tonight, the hunger surged within her, more powerful than ever before. It clawed at her mind, urging her to take what she needed, to indulge in the life force that surrounded her. She tried to resist, retreating to the quiet sanctuary of the monastery's inner gardens, but the hunger followed her, growing louder, more insistent. And then she heard a voice, not the gentle whispers of the monks' teachings, but a darker, more primal call. It spoke of power, of freedom, of the ecstasy that came with embracing her true nature. "You are no human," the voice hissed in her mind. "You are a predator, and they are your prey." Ahri clenched her fists, her tails bristling as she fought to silence the voice. But as the festival continued, the sounds of laughter and music became a cacophony, each note fueling her inner turmoil. Her vision blurred, the edges of the world fading as the hunger took hold. She felt herself slipping, her control unraveling like threads pulled from a tapestry. Then it happened. A young monk, no older than 16, approached her in the garden, his face full of concern. "Are you all right, Lady Ahri?" he asked, his voice soft and sincere. Ahri turned to him, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. She could feel his life force, vibrant and untouched, pulsing like a beacon. The hunger surged, and before she could stop herself, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm. The connection was instant, a flood of energy rushing into her as the boy staggered back, his face pale with shock. "No!" Ahri gasped, pulling away, but it was too late. The boy collapsed to the ground, weak but alive, his breaths shallow. The garden fell silent, the distant sounds of the festival fading into nothingness. Ahri knelt beside him, her hands trembling. She had lost control, just as she feared she would. The monks found them moments later, their faces a mix of anger and fear. Shenli stepped forward, his calm demeanor betrayed by the tightness in his jaw. "You have broken our trust," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I warned you of the storm within, and still you let it consume you." Ahri tried to explain, to apologize, but her words felt hollow. She had failed, Not just the monks, but herself. The peace she had sought, the balance she had worked so hard to achieve, now felt further away than ever. The monks expelled her from the monastery the following morning. Shenli's parting words stayed with her. "You cannot fight what you are, Ahri, but if you do not learn to accept it, it will destroy you and everything you touch." As Ahri descended the cliffs, leaving the monastery behind, she felt a crushing sense of despair. Her struggle had reached its breaking point, and she had been found wanting. But amidst the darkness, a spark of determination remained. She realized that Shenli was right. She couldn't deny her nature. The hunger was part of her, and if she ever hoped to control it, she would have to face it head-on. Her journey was far from over. The conflict within her had not been resolved, but it had been clarified. She now understood that the path to mastery wasn't about suppressing her power, but about understanding it, embracing it, and finding a way to use it without losing herself in the process. It was a battle she would fight every day, but she was no longer afraid of the struggle. She would weather the storm, no matter how fierce, because deep down, she knew that the only way to find peace was to create it herself. Ahri wandered aimlessly through the dense forests and rolling hills of Ionia, her mind a storm of emotions. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of her failure at the monastery clung to her like a shroud. The memory of the young monk's face, pale and stricken as she drew his essence, played endlessly in her mind. It wasn't the first life she had touched in such a way, but it was the first that made her truly see herself, not as a misunderstood wanderer or a creature struggling for survival, but as a force of destruction. The thought made her stomach churn. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the world in hues of amber and crimson. Ahri found herself drawn to a quiet glade by a babbling brook. The serenity of the place stood in stark contrast to the turmoil within her, yet it was the very stillness that beckoned her to stay. She sat on the mossy ground, her tails curling around her as if seeking to comfort her, and closed her eyes. The soft sound of the water and the gentle rustle of leaves provided a rare moment of reprieve. For the first time in what felt like weeks, Ahri let herself feel. She didn't push the emotions away or bury them beneath distractions. Instead, she allowed the pain, regret, and guilt to wash over her. Her mind drifted back to the monastery, to Shenli's parting words. "You cannot fight what you are. If you do not learn to accept it, it will destroy you." She had thought of herself as strong, capable of mastering her powers through sheer will. But now, she understood how deeply she had misunderstood her struggle. She had spent so long running, from the villagers she had frightened, from the truths of her Vastayan heritage, and most of all, from herself. Every step forward had been accompanied by a refusal to face the core of her pain, the hunger that defined her existence. It wasn't just a physical need or a magical affliction. It was tied to something far deeper. It was a reflection of her longing for connection, her fear of being alone, and her desperate wish to belong in a world that seemed to have no place for her. Her mind drifted further, back to the wandering musician in the forest. His song and his story of the fox spirit who lost herself now resonated with her in a way it hadn't before. At the time, she had focused on the story's ending, the idea that the spirit had to choose who she wanted to be. But now, she realized that the choice wasn't as simple as she had hoped. It wasn't a matter of choosing humanity over her Vastayan nature, or vice versa. The choice was in how she embraced the entirety of who she was, without letting any part of herself be consumed by fear or denial. Ahri opened her eyes and gazed at her reflection in the brook. The golden eyes that stared back at her seemed distant, alien. For so long, she had thought her beauty and allure were the tools she needed to survive, to earn acceptance. But she saw now that they had only masked her true struggles, allowing her to charm others while hiding the turmoil within. The reflection rippled as a tear fell into the water, and she let out a soft, bitter laugh. Even now, she could feel the pull of life around her, The energy of the glade, the faint whispers of nearby creatures, the delicate hum of the brook's essence. It was always there, an ever-present reminder of what she was. Yet, as Ahri stared into the water, another thought began to take shape, fragile but insistent. Perhaps the hunger wasn't just a curse. What if it was a message, a lesson she had been too blind to see? She had spent so long focusing on the pain it caused, the destruction it left in its wake, that she had never truly considered what it could mean. The monks had spoken of balance, of the harmony between light and shadow, life and death. What if her power wasn't meant to be controlled or suppressed, but understood as part of that balance? The realization struck her like a cold wind. Her hunger wasn't just a need to take, it was also a reflection of her need to give. The life force she absorbed wasn't hers to keep. It was part of a cycle, one she had disrupted by refusing to see beyond her own survival. If she could learn to channel that energy, to return what she had taken, perhaps she could find the peace she sought, but the path to understanding would not be easy. Ahri knew she couldn't do this alone, and yet the thought of seeking help again filled her with apprehension. The pain of rejection, the sting of disappointment, it had hardened her heart, making her reluctant to trust others. Still, she couldn't ignore the lesson the monks had taught her, even in their parting. Growth could not happen in isolation, and healing could not begin without confronting the wounds she had hidden for so long. As night fell, the glade grew quiet, bathed in the silver glow of the moon. Ahri stood and gazed at the stars, their distant light a reminder of how small she was in the vastness of the world. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't feel lost. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges she could barely comprehend, but she was no longer afraid of facing it. Ahri placed a hand over her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She thought of the lives she had touched, the ones she had harmed, and the ones she had saved. Their energy still lingered within her, not as a burden, but as a reminder. She wasn't defined by her hunger, her mistakes, or her pain. She was defined by the choices she made in the face of them. With renewed resolve, Ahri turned away from the brook and began walking. The hunger remained, whispering its familiar call, but it no longer felt like a monster lurking in the shadows. It was part of her, and though she didn't yet fully understand it, she was determined to learn. Her journey was far from over, but she was no longer running from it. For the first time, she was running towards something, a chance to truly know herself and to find the balance that had eluded her for so long. The journey that brought Ahri to the bustling port city of Whale had tested every part of her resolve. Here, amidst the chaotic mix of traders, sailors, and mystics from across Runeterra, she would face the culmination of her struggle. The city was a crossroads of cultures, a place where magic and commerce intertwined, and where secrets lurked in every shadow. For Ahri, it was not just a destination, but a crucible, a place where her fate would finally be decided. Ahri had come to Whale on the trail of a rumored artifact known as the Heart of Varaska, an ancient gem said to hold the power to balance a being's essence, bridging the divide between light and shadow. The stories claimed it was created by a Vastian elder, a being who had mastered the delicate harmony between their primal nature and the civilized world. For Ahri, it seemed like the answer she had been searching for, a chance to finally silence the hunger that had haunted her for so long. Yet, as she delved into the labyrinthine streets of Whale, seeking whispers of the artifact's location, she found herself confronted by a darker reality. The city's underbelly was rife with exploitation and cruelty, and its people were far from the idealized humans she had once longed to understand. Ahri saw traders exploiting the poor, thieves preying on the desperate, and enforcers maintaining order with brutal efficiency. It was a stark reminder that humanity, like herself, was neither purely good nor evil, but a complicated mixture of both. Eventually, her search led her to an ancient temple on the outskirts of the city, half buried in the cliffs that overlooked the sea. The temple was shrouded in mystery, its entrance guarded by weathered statues of Vastayan ancestors. As Ahri stepped inside, her senses were immediately overwhelmed by the powerful magic that saturated the air. The walls glowed faintly with runes that shifted and shimmered as she passed, as if alive. At the temple's heart lay the heart of Varaska, its crystalline form pulsing with an otherworldly light. Ahri approached the artifact cautiously, her tails twitching in anticipation. The gem seemed to hum with energy, resonating with her very essence. She could feel the hunger within her stir, but this time, it wasn't the wild, uncontrollable force she had come to fear. It was quieter, steadier, as though the gem itself was soothing the storm inside her. But as she reached out to touch the artifact, she felt a presence behind her. Turning swiftly, she found herself face to face with a figure cloaked in shadows, a being she recognized as a spirit guardian, one of the ancient protectors of Vastayan relics. Its voice echoed in her mind, low and resonant as it spoke. "You seek balance," the guardian said, "but balance is not given. It is earned. What are you willing to sacrifice to achieve it?" Ahri hesitated, her mind racing. She had sacrificed so much already, her comfort, her illusions, her place in the world. What more could she give? But as she looked into the guardian's glowing eyes, she realized the answer. The final sacrifice she needed to make was not something external. It was her fear, her guilt, and her denial of what she truly was. "I am willing to face myself," she said, her voice steady. "I will not run from what I am anymore." The guardian nodded, and the room was suddenly filled with a blinding light. Ahri felt the energy of the heart of Varaska envelop her, pulling her into a whirlwind of visions. She saw her past laid bare, the villagers she had hurt, the moments she had fled, the faces of those she had loved and lost. Each memory was a fragment of the life she had tried to piece together, and each one brought with it a wave of emotions: sorrow, joy, regret, and hope. In the final vision, she saw herself standing alone, her reflection split between her human and Vastayan forms. The hunger she had feared for so long appeared not as a monstrous force, but as a part of her, a shadow of her desires, her instincts, and her longing to connect. To conquer it, she realized, she didn't need to erase it. She needed to embrace it, to understand that it was a part of her that could be guided, not ignored. When the light faded, Ahri found herself kneeling before the heart of Varaska. She felt different, not cured, but changed. The hunger still lingered, but it no longer dominated her. It was quiet, a whisper rather than a scream, and for the first time, she felt as though she could live alongside it rather than being consumed by it. The guardian's voice returned, softer now. "You have taken the first step toward balance. Remember, it is not a destination but a journey. The harmony you seek will require vigilance and choice." Ahri nodded, her heart heavy with both relief and responsibility. She had found a way forward, but she knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. As she left the temple, the morning sun bathed the cliffs in golden light, and the city of Whale spread out before her like a tapestry of possibilities. The people she passed on her way back into the city looked at her with a mix of awe and curiosity, but Ahri no longer sought their approval. She had made peace with the duality of her existence. She was neither entirely human nor wholly Vastayan, neither predator nor prey. She was Ahri, and that was enough. Her journey was far from over. There were still questions to be answered, truths to be uncovered, and battles to be fought. But as she stepped into the vibrant chaos of the city, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. For the first time, Ahri was not running from her nature or her past. She was running toward her future, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Ahri's journey through self-discovery and balance did not merely change her. It rippled outward, leaving an indelible mark on the world around her. Her newfound understanding of her nature and her choice to embrace rather than suppress it set her on a path that would intertwine her story with others, shifting fates and altering the course of lives in ways both subtle and profound. The first to feel the impact were the people of Whale. The enigmatic woman with fox-like tails who had emerged from the temple inspired both awe and mystery. Stories of her connection to the heart of Varaska spread quickly, whispered in taverns and markets. To some, she was a hero, a Vastaya who sought to bridge the gap between humanity and her kind. To others, she was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of power unchecked. Either way, her presence ignited conversations that had long been dormant in Ionia. Wela was a city where tensions between humans and Vastaya often simmered beneath the surface. Centuries of mistrust had created an uneasy coexistence, with Vastaya viewed as relics of an older, more mystical time that humanity was eager to leave behind. But Ahri's actions challenged these perceptions. By openly embracing both sides of her nature, she became a living example of the potential for harmony between the two worlds. Her willingness to share her story, her struggles, her failures, and her triumphs resonated with those who listened. She spoke not as a perfect figure, but as someone flawed and striving, and that vulnerability made her words all the more powerful. Among the Vastaya, Ahri's journey sparked a movement of introspection and reconnection. Many had distanced themselves from their ancestral ties to the natural world, choosing to hide or assimilate in human-dominated societies. Ahri's example reminded them of their roots, of the delicate balance their ancestors had fought to preserve. In the remote Vastayan communities scattered across Ionia, elders began to tell new stories inspired by Ahri's journey, stories of unity, of finding strength in duality, and of reclaiming lost traditions. But her influence extended beyond the borders of Ionia. Travelers and merchants carried tales of the fox spirit across Runeterra, and in each retelling, her story evolved. In the Shuriman deserts, she became a symbol of survival, her ability to endure hardship, inspiring those who faced the unforgiving sands. In Piltover and Zaun, scholars and inventors debated the nature of her powers, speculating on the connection between Vastayan magic and the scientific advancements of their cities. Even in Noxus, where strength and conquest ruled, there were those who saw Ahri as a reminder that true power lay not in domination, but in understanding oneself. Yet, not all the consequences of her journey were positive. The knowledge of the heart of Varaska and its connection to Vastayan relics drew the attention of those who sought to exploit it. Treasure hunters and mercenaries descended upon Ionia, driven by greed and ambition. Conflict erupted as these intruders clashed with the guardians of the land, threatening the delicate balance Ahri had worked so hard to honor. Ahri found herself at the center of these battles, forced to protect the very harmony she had only just begun to understand. Among her most significant impacts, however, was her ability to change individuals. In the years following her departure from Wale, Ahri became a wandering figure of legend, appearing in moments of great need. She would save a struggling farmer from a bandit attack, only to vanish before he could offer thanks. She would guide a lost child home, leaving behind only the faint scent of cherry blossoms. These small acts of kindness, though fleeting, left lasting impressions on those she encountered. To them, she was a guardian spirit, a reminder that even in a world filled with strife, there was still room for compassion. One of the most poignant legacies of her journey was her reunion with Shenli, the monk who had expelled her from the monastery. Years after their parting, Ahri returned, not as a student seeking guidance, but as an equal offering wisdom. Together, they worked to repair the trust that had been broken, and Shenli became one of her strongest allies in spreading her message of balance. Their collaboration marked a turning point for the monastery, which began to welcome both humans and Vastaya, fostering a new generation of seekers dedicated to unity. But the most profound change was within Ahri herself. No longer haunted by the hunger she had once feared, she became a figure of balance, not just between human and Vastian, but between predator and protector, instinct and reason, shadow and light. She learned to wield her power with care, to take only what was necessary, and to give back in equal measure. Her journey was far from over, but she had found the strength to face it without fear or doubt. Ahri's legacy was not carved into monuments or written in history books, but it endured in the hearts and minds of those she touched. Her story became a symbol of resilience and transformation, a reminder that even the most broken among us could find redemption. And in the quiet moments of her travels, when she gazed at the stars or listened to the rustle of leaves in the wind, Ahri allowed herself a rare smile. She had found her place in the world, not as something to be feared or worshipped, but as a part of the endless, ever-changing cycle of life. Her story, though far from over, had already shaped the world in ways she could never have imagined. And as she walked the paths of Runeterra, her 9 tails trailing behind her like a living tapestry, Ahri carried with her the knowledge that she was not defined by her hunger or her mistakes, but by the choices she made and the legacy she left behind. The moon hung high over the Ionian landscape, its silvery light casting a gentle glow over the winding paths Ahri now walked. The world seemed quieter in the stillness of night, as if holding its breath in anticipation of dawn. Ahri paused at the crest of a hill, her gaze drifting across the horizon. Below her, the lights of a distant village twinkled like stars fallen to earth. She had been here before, years ago when she was still running from herself, from the truth of what she was. Now, the sight stirred something different within her, not fear or longing, but calm resolve. Her tail swayed lightly in the cool breeze, a subtle reminder of the power she carried. It no longer felt like a burden. The hunger still whispered, ever present, but it was no longer a scream demanding to be obeyed. She had learned to listen without giving in, to find balance in the pull between instinct and choice. The path forward would never be easy, but it was hers to walk, and that was enough. As she stood there, Ahri reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the countless faces she had encountered, the lives she had touched, both for better and worse. She thought of the monks, the travelers, and the countless others who had shaped her story, just as she had shaped theirs. Each one was a thread in the tapestry of her life, woven together to form something she could finally begin to understand. For so long, Ahri had sought a place to belong, a way to reconcile the parts of herself that seemed forever at odds. But now, she realized that belonging wasn't about fitting neatly into one world or another. It was about creating a space where she could be fully herself, embracing both her Vastayan heritage and her human desires. She was not bound by the expectations of others or the shadows of her past. She was free to be something entirely her own, and yet a question lingered in her mind, as persistent as the tides. What would her future hold? Her journey for balance and understanding had brought her far, but the world was vast, its mysteries countless. She had seen the fragility of harmony, the way even small ripples could create storms. She had felt the tension between humanity and the Vastaya, the cracks in the delicate peace that held them together. And she knew that her story was but one among many, each thread connected to a greater weave she could only glimpse. As Ahri turned away from the village lights and began to walk, she found herself wondering, could she do more than find balance for herself? Could she become a bridge between the worlds that seemed destined to clash? The thought was daunting, yet it stirred something deep within her, a flicker of hope, a spark of purpose. The road stretched before her, shrouded in shadows and lit by the faint glow of the moon. It was a road without a clear destination, one that would take her to places she could not yet imagine. But for the first time, Ahri did not fear the unknown. She welcomed it, knowing that every step, every choice would bring her closer to understanding not just herself, but the world she sought to protect. And so, the fox spirit walked on, her 9 tails trailing behind her like whispers of a story still unfolding. Somewhere in the distance, the first light of dawn began to break, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. It was a reminder that every ending was also a beginning, and that the next chapter of Ahri's journey was waiting to be written. Would she find the peace she sought, not just for herself, but for the fragile world around her? Or would the shadows of her nature and the chaos of Runeterra pull her back into darkness? The answers lay ahead, hidden in the twists and turns of the path she had chosen. And as Ahri disappeared into the horizon, her figure silhouetted against the rising sun, one truth remained. Her story was far from over, and the secrets of her enchanting nature had only just begun to reveal themselves.